Welcome to Amplifying Leadership, a place where we talk with guests on their leadership journeys and hear about what they think is key to becoming a great leader. My name is Tara Lehman, and I'm a partner, coach, and consultant at Twin Life Coaching and Business Services, of which Amplifying Leadership is a division. For our leadership clients, we support you through this podcast and various leadership services. To learn more about Amplifying Leadership, please visit us at amplifyingleadership.ca. Today, I am welcoming Charlotte Rooney, a career coach and work-life balance strategist for busy women, with an awesome topic today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited about this conversation because the topic's so important. But before we get to that, tell us a little bit about your leadership story or why leadership is so important to you.
Well, I would love to. So my first leadership role, apart from things that you do as a child, was actually in the family business right after high school.
Okay.
I took a year off between high school and university because we had just decided to expand our family business and we'd bought a second site on the other side of town. And so I came in to kind of manage the first site so that my mother, who was the day-to-day manager, could actually go and focus on the new area. So I was sort of 17 and nominally, the manager of this bookshop. It was incredibly formative as a journey, kind of that coming into that space with authority, I guess, from that position of who I was, but really not that level of kind of age or experience that would normally be associated with that. So I was managing people who were much older than I was. And that really meant that I had a very steep learning curve about the difference between authority and leadership and true followership.
Absolutely. Wow. Especially when there's large age gaps and you're so young. So people already believe that they have so much more over you, right? That just at the beginning, and then you're managing the bookstore. Wow.
Yeah. And so that's one, I think it's really useful because I came into that position with kind of a hypothesis about what works in leadership. And it really allowed me to test that under pressure. It's where I first really grounded myself in the idea of leading by example, but also where I first came across kind of the biggest pitfall that a lot of people who believe in leading by example tend to fall into, which is it's not the same to lead by example as to just do everything yourself and hope that other people will watch you and decide to do some of it too.
Do it as well. Yes, I agree.
And I think a lot of us believe that's how it will work, right? We will be leading the way. We'll be showing people how it should be done, and they will be inspired by our dedication, how hard we work, how helpful we are, the way we interact with other people, and they will sort of spontaneously emulate that. I certainly see that a lot with the women that I work with. They're like, but I'm showing them exactly the way I want our team to work. And it's not translating immediately into other people behaving in the same way. So I definitely learned that one really hard in my first leadership position. After university, I went to work in international development. I spent between about 5 and 10 years in various different developing countries running programs and projects. I started in primary education in Latin America, moved through technical and vocational education, and ended up in the Democratic Republic of Congo leading emergency health responses.
Wow.
Very different leadership environment.
Yes, exactly.
And that one was definitely a question of realizing that you can't lead by example in that state in the same way, because there's issues around access and security and safety that meant that I had to develop a different way of supporting my teams, particularly say in the Congo, where we were doing healthcare. So we were running remote clinics, running with a doctor and nurses, and of course I don't have any of those qualifications. So really forced me to think differently about the value that I could add to the outcomes that we were trying to achieve, given that I did not have any of the kind of technical side of things. Right. But on the other hand, what I did have was access to the UN and funding and all different other kinds of resources that the doctors and nurses who were working in the team didn't have. And so together, we were then able to have that much bigger impact. I did that, as I said, for probably about 10 years in total. And 10 years ago, I kind of had a shift in what was important to me in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Moved away from 100% of my life is my career, which is what happens when you're in humanitarian relief and international development, and wanted to consciously make the decision to prioritize my family. So I moved to the UK, and wasn't quite sure how to kind of marry those two things. How do you do
Right.
international development if you don't want to go overseas?
That's a challenge.
Yes, indeed. So I tried that for a little while. It really didn't work out for me. And that's when I took a complete pivot and went into management consulting. Um, I spent 4 years at McKinsey,
Mhm.
which again, what a learning experience
I
going
bet.
from, sometimes being the country level representative of an organization, the only member of your organization representing at that level, to the most junior person in the room in every room that I was in, despite the experience that I had, being new into consulting was like a completely clean slate. Um,
Hmm.
so again, a really interesting journey from sort of that very clear leadership role of you are genuinely in charge to how do you take that experience and become the most junior person in the room and learn
Hmm.
to lead in a very different environment. Um, so that was, again, really, really interesting. I spent 4 years there before leaving to join a startup, um, which had 3 employees when I arrived and nearly
Wow.
100 by the time I left. Um,
That's growth.
it was indeed. It was a very,
Yes.
very fast scaling startup. That was 3 years from when I joined it till when I left. And again, completely different experience of learning how to tailor leadership when you are dealing with very different levels of resourcing, very different levels of commitment, amongst the team that we had. And then I left that to start my own business, which is where I am today. And that's gone completely back the other way because I have a very tiny team now. So rather than being
Hmm.
at the top of a larger team, I am now just me and one or two other people, doing everything from top to the
Yeah.
bottom.
It's amazing how throughout your careers that you've been able to take that basic leadership from when we were 17 and let it ever change with the environment or the country or the size of the places that you've been to, which is really important in leadership because we can't lead the same way everywhere that we go or even the countries that we're in, right? Everybody is different, like you said, the Congo, right? Completely different maybe than anywhere else. So I love that you talk a lot about how we can change our leadership across the board and really become accommodating to where we're at. I think that's really important and maybe where a lot of the successes came for you because you were so accommodating and adjusting to each
Mm.
and every position, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because we often talk about kind of finding your leadership style.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of work out there about the different leadership styles that exist. There's lots of, tests that you can take and people who can help you
Mm-hmm.
to find your authentic style. But as you say, I think truly successful leadership has to be adaptive. And while you might
Mm-hmm.
have a style of leadership that feels more comfortable to you, that is
For
sort
sure.
of your default, um, if you always go to that, then yeah, you tend to find that it works really well in some circumstances. And then maybe you end
Mm-hmm.
up in front of a new team or in a new organization, and what used to work doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, we definitely need to be adaptive as leaders, but we also need to do something that I can't wait to talk about. And I don't know about you, but a lot of my clients miss this piece is that when we're leaders, we're not expected to do everything. And a lot of us will just take everything on and not delegate, which is our hot topic today, is about delegation and mastering this. So why did delegation as a leader become so important for you to want to share more about it?
Well, I think part of it is exactly what you've just said, right? That it's a fundamental thinking shift that
Hmm.
you need to make when you go from being an individual contributor to being a leader, is that you are no longer the person who does all the things, the person who
Hmm.
gets done. You are now the person who needs to make it easier for other people to get things done.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think a lot of us miss that when we first move
I
into leadership.
agree. Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough one to go that transition, right? If you weren't a leader to being a leader and understanding that a leader needs to delegate, right? Just like you said.
And particularly, I think, it's something that I found really difficult as well, because I had a lot of, for want of a better word, I had a lot of pride and a lot of my identity attached
Mhm.
in this identity of being the person who could get things done. If you gave it to me, you knew it would happen, you knew it would happen fast, and you knew it would work. Particularly in the startups, it wasn't always pretty, but it always worked. And
Mhm.
that was really important to me. And so moving into a leadership role and realizing that you're no longer the person who does all the things almost gave me a bit of an identity crisis of like, what what am I here for? What am I
Mhm.
adding if I'm not the person who's actually doing the work? And I see this in the women that I work with all the time, that they also have this kind of association of, I've always been the person who could do things. I'm quick, I'm smart, I'm good at it. If I'm not doing it, what am I adding? So that's one of the reasons that I think it's really important to
Mhm.
address it head on, about that role shift between doer to manager, doer to leader. I think the other piece that really made this important to me is that, if you're not delegating work, if you are still acting as though you're an individual contributor and you're also taking on management or leadership roles, that is a recipe for a very quick burnout.
It
Uh,
certainly is.
and I think, while there are, of course, many things that go into burnout, and it's not exclusively about workload, you are definitely going to make yourself more vulnerable to it if you are overworking all the time. But the second piece that I think people often forget about is it's not only your burnout that you're risking if you're keeping everything to yourself and not delegating, you're actually disempowering your team and making it less easy for them to feel satisfied and purposeful in their job. So you're also making it almost in ways more likely that your team is going to burn out because you're not
Mhm.
handing over the things that matter. And that's one that really gets people, because half of the reason they're not handing it over is because they're worried that their team are overburdened, and they think, well, I
Mhm.
mustn't delegate because they've all got high workloads already. If I delegate more, they will burn out. And ironically, by holding back on the things that would allow them to grow, that would allow them to feel trusted, that would allow them to feel like they were important contributors towards the goal that you're making, you're actually flicking all the switches that make burnout more likely. So
Mhm.
those are the reasons that I think it's really important to talk about this and to admit that I don't think anybody finds it easy to begin with, but it's a
Yeah.
skill worth mastering.
It absolutely is. I mean, I've talked to people, managers or leaders or who they're new to that, and they'll be so quick to just say, "Oh, just give it to me. I can get it done in 5 minutes." But you really are disempowering your team, and you're almost telling them in some ways that I don't trust you to get it done. And, or at least
Exactly.
that's what they hear, because we think we're doing them this huge favor, right? In some cases, and yet we're they're hearing that I don't trust you, or I
Yep.
don't believe you can get it done in time, which is a trust factor. So now when we try to delegate or ask them if they have any ideas or see if they can help us out, now the trust is broken. And suddenly we're just in this spot where it's like, okay, nobody's doing anything I ask. And now we have a different problem coming up. So I like that you touched on those, because burnout of a leader and burnout of a team, I mean, that needs to be addressed as well. And I
Mm.
like also that you mentioned that, that people do want to grow and learn. They do want to know that they have a part of a project that's their ownership, and then they can come to you for support, which is the key word for leaders, right? And that they can be proud of it and creates that trust. So what are your thoughts around that, or maybe even those, other challenges that we have? Maybe obviously female leaders have more challenges with this than male leaders, as we know. But what are your thoughts around that or other challenges?
Yeah. To be clear, I don't think that struggling with delegation is an exclusively female problem, as you've just said. I think,
Agree. Yeah.
for men and women, I think the problems are often quite similar, but there are additional factors for women that can make it harder.
Mhm.
Um, So on top of the challenges that we've already mentioned, kind of, challenges for the team, that they don't feel trusted, that their growth opportunities are being stunted, that they're not being encouraged to take ownership of the problem that you're trying to solve. They may not feel included. You can also find that often members of the team are looking at you as the leader and they want to help. They see you, particularly if you are still doing all of the individual contributor and leading on top. They see you overworking. They see you, staying late in the office or online sending emails at 11 p.m. from home. And they often want to help. But if you don't have that openness about what is on your plate and what needs to be done, they don't know where they can step in and they don't know where that they can offer. I think for the leaders, the challenges that you have, right, are obviously is going to lead you to overwork if you're trying to keep everything on your plate.
Yeah.
It can also lead you to sort of micromanaging. I think that, oh, just give it to me, I'll do it, it's faster, is often perceived and experienced as micromanagement by the people underneath you. If you're thinking from a bigger sort of perspective, the problem with this as well is that it's going to stop your peers and your superiors really thinking of you as a strategic leader. Because a strategic leader is not someone who is in the weeds doing all of the doing themselves. And so if you're spending time and energy on tasks that should be being done by someone more junior, the message you're actually sending outwards is not what a helpful, kind and considerate leader, which is what you think you're doing. You're actually sending the message, I haven't understood what my leadership role is. And that can have enormous impact on your career progression later, if that's what you're trying to do, because you're not demonstrating the skills and capacities that a more senior level leader is going to be able to do. On a big level, there's that. I think when we think about the challenges internally from the person who is doing the delegating, the biggest one for everybody, and I think this is for men and women as well, is around control. We think that if we keep it to ourselves, we have everything under control and we can make sure that, the quality is going to be up to scratch, that we can control whether or not it hits the deadline. We can control whether or not the client is happy, whether that's an external client or an internal client. You know exactly how it will be done. It will be done the way that you would do it. And we think that that is always going to give us the best outcome. So it's letting ourselves explore and be open to the idea that we have less control. Even when we're doing it ourselves, we have less control than we think. And that secondly, giving up on that control isn't the same thing as saying, I don't care about the result. I don't care what comes out of this. And it's fine if it's terrible. I think that's the first kind of challenge and hurdle that you have to address when you're first thinking about wanting to delegate. The second one that I think is a really big shift is tied in with that idea about overwork, right? There's almost an assumption that if we delegate tasks to people in the team, that's going to be received negatively. That it's going to be like, oh, I'm being given even more work. How unfair. And that makes it a huge barrier for us. We want to be leaders who care about our people. We want to be being aware of the experience that they're having. And so if you're believing that delegation is necessarily going to make their experience worse, of course you don't want to do it.
Yes. Yeah.
Stops us. Sorry, go ahead.
It stops them, right? It stops them from doing that delegation at that point because it's in the mind that they believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. Immediately, you're going to start looking of ways to do it yourself because you think doing this, delegating this to someone else is going to be bad for them. So I think those are kind of the two mindset shifts that really help when starting to think about what you want to delegate. And of course, there come the litany of ones afterwards around, I should be able to cope with everything by myself. That's how I show that I'm, I'm competent, which of course, not true, particularly not true as a leader. I think for women, there can be some extra difficulties when we're thinking about confidently and effectively delegating. we don't want to be seen as being commanding and kind of telling people what to do. And I think a lot of the time people imagine delegating as an experience of sort of saying, you, Joe, do activity A.
Yes.
Which of course is not really what effective
No,
delegation is like. That's not the
no.
conversation that you have. But I think that's the imagination that we sometimes have of what we will be perceived as doing if we start delegating. We've talked about worrying about the workload of the people receiving, and I think particularly these days with ever increasing demands on people's times and constrained budgets, that's something that leaders are really rightly concerned about, wanting to make sure that their people are well resourced so that they can thrive in their roles and do what they need to do. The other one that I see women talking about more than men, which isn't to say that men don't experience it, but I think women talk about it more, is thinking about how they should put their team's well-being first and they should come last. And so if anyone is going to be working late, if anyone is going to be taking on that extra project that wasn't in the plan, it should be them. And so that also then leads you to potentially not choose the right person for a task. I think the final one is I think that women often are sort of conditioned to believe that they should be very sensitive to other people's emotions and other people's desires. And I think that can make them sometimes feel uncomfortable about making decisions that they think somebody else might not like. Goes back to that thought error of delegating something is bad.
Yes.
But you're believing that, and you're believing that, your superpower is in your relationships with people, in being caring, in making sure that your team are happy, then that is another reason I think why a lot of women find the idea of looking deliberately at their workload with an eye to delegating as much as possible. I think that's where they get stuck.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I agree with you there, and I see it in my clients as well. Like, just even talking about taking care of yourself first, because you can't lead a team if you're not taking care of you, whether that be self-care for burnout or really understanding who can do what in your team and help you, or even asking the team, what is it that you guys need from me? Or do you need ABC, or what resources do you need? And those, by the way, don't have to be you as the leader. Resources of time could potentially be an admin person who just needs to do a little research. There's always other ways to delegate some of those things if your immediate team can't do them. But I also love that you touched on the word control, because we as humans like to make sure we're in control of ourselves. And sometimes that happens with leaders, where they do need to feel that they have that control over how fast things get done, how it gets done. It's my way or the highway type things. But we're not perfect either as leaders. And our way may not be the right way, the perfect way. Maybe it is, but eliciting some feedback on those types of things can also help us greatly when it comes to learning that it's okay to delegate. So I want to come to something you mentioned earlier, not on the podcast, but earlier, was that you do have a framework that can help our leaders with really understanding how to delegate. Can you share
Yes,
that with us today? I would love to hear it.
I would love to, because I think, as you said, when done well, delegation is a win for everyone.
Yes.
And it's not, it's not something that we need to see as an imposition on people. And so this framework just really helps you to structure your approach to it to make sure that everybody is winning.
Right.
It's very simple. There are 3 parts. And what to delegate, who to delegate to, and how to do it so that every person has a chance of success. And I actually always recommend, I love that you were talking just now about kind of, thinking of the different resources that are available, because I always like to recommend that you start with who you want to delegate to rather than what you want to delegate. Because having that more person-centered approach, I think, is the basis for making it really successful. You're basically looking at the people in your team or the resources who are available to you, even if they're outside of your team. And you're looking at, what are people interested in? What are their strengths? What are they particularly good at, because typically we enjoy what we're good at. So giving someone the chance to do more of what they're good at is usually going to increase their job satisfaction as well as their efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And then thinking, what are they interested in growing? What are they interested in learning more about? So then you have a sort of short list of likely candidates who could be excited about the opportunity of taking on something new, which covers the first worry that you might have of like, oh, are they actually going to enjoy this? Do they have the capacity? Because you're asking yourself the questions when you're reviewing the people in your team. Then you want to look at, what do you want to delegate? And I recommend looking at this through a very similar lens, but for yourself, right? So you think about, what are your strengths? What do you enjoy doing? And when you are in your element, when are you producing the most value for the people in your team, the most value for your organization? And so that's going to be when you're operating really at kind of the top level of your experience and your expertise. For me, for example, when I first moved into the startup, I'm very efficient at doing a lot of admin things. So I sort of ended up getting to be the person who did all of the printing and the, meeting room booking and, lots of stuff like that. And of course, I can do that very easily, very quickly, much more quickly than teaching somebody else how to use the system to do it. But is that the role of someone in the position that I wanted to be in? I wanted to be the COO, but I was doing admin work. And that really got in the way of me progressing in the organization the way that I wanted to be, because I wasn't sending those correct signals.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing to really think about when you're thinking about what needs to be delegated. Not only what can I do quickly and easily, and but where am I actually being of best service? And that's when you're doing the things that only you can do, not that somebody else in the organization could do if you spent 15 minutes showing them how the booking system worked and gave them a login.
Right.
And then when you have those things, so you have a list of the things that either you're not great at, or that you don't enjoy doing, or that, for want of a better term, are below your pay grade, that you are still doing. And then on the other hand, you have a list of people who are looking for opportunities to grow, who want to contribute more, and you want to match those up as best as you can. Now, you may have things that you want to delegate that nobody is wildly excited about doing.
Happens.
Yes. And in those cases, this is where we get to the piece that's around how you make sure that this works out well. And it is a conversation. It's talking about, what is the overarching goal that you need to achieve? How do these tasks support that? So that it's really, really clear that the person taking it on is taking on something that matters. And this is also a marvelous opportunity, because if you can't explain to the person that you're trying to delegate to why it is that what you want them to do matters, this is probably a big red flag that you shouldn't be doing it.
And it's the key there, the why or the purpose, because when people know what that is, they're a lot more engaged to do it. Even if it's something as simple as that booking system, it needs to happen because, this is how we gain our clients, or this is whatever, right? As long as they know the why behind it, it's easier to delegate.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And, it's that connection with impact as well, being able to see, I mean, the classic story about Kennedy going to NASA when they were trying to put a man on the moon, and he's talking to the janitor, and he asks the janitor, what are you doing? And he says, I'm helping to put a man on the moon.
Exactly.
And you can go all the way down like that, the person booking the meeting so that you can have the interview to hire the person who's going to end up being your business development manager, who means that, that you're able to break into a new market and you can serve more people with your product. That wouldn't happen without that booking. And so you can allow the person to really connect with and feel appreciated for the value that they are genuinely adding, which is, we can't get there without this piece.
Yes. And that is something I talk to a lot of my leaders is about why. Put the why behind things, because as humans, we like to know that answer almost sometimes above anything else. Why are you asking me to do this? Well, here's a great reason why. And, the Kennedy one is a great story. So thank you for sharing that. It's really simple. It really is a very simple process. that you have for delegating, and for all the amazing tips and things that you've provided us with today. If our audience had to take something away from you today, and you want to give them that one key thing, that hot tip, what would you say that would be for them today?
The one thing that I would say to everybody who's listening is you should be delegating more.
Love it. Love
And
it.
I am sure that triggers some people when they hear it. It certainly does when I say it to myself, but it's a great challenge as a leader to just start from the perspective of I should be empowering my team more. I should be delegating more. I should be constraining my input more tightly to where I am really adding value.
Yes, I love it. So it sounds so simple, but you've given us a process that we can use to make what sounds simple actually simple. So thank you so much for sharing that and all the information today. If our audience wanted to learn more about you or more about delegation, is there a way they can get in touch with you online?
Absolutely. The best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I am at Charlotte Rooney, all written together right after the slash. That will take you straight to my profile. Follow or connect with me. I love actually connecting with people. So, say hello. And if you want to know more about delegation, you can simply send me the word delegate, and I will share with you my free cheat sheet on that delegation framework, which has the top 3 questions to ask yourself in the who, what, and how sections to really start thinking about delegation in this way so that you can delegate more effectively, guilt-free, without worrying that the quality of the work will suffer, and really unlock the power that is in your team.
Love it. And audience, just in case you want to know how to spell her last name, it is Rooney. Thank you, Charlotte, so much for your insights today. It was a great conversation.
Thank you for having me, Tara. I really enjoyed it.
Of course, thank you to our listeners. We hope you are taking away some great tips from Charlotte today. Leaders need to continually grow and develop for themselves and for their team. If you need support through leadership coaching, training, or even a speaker for your next leadership event, then visit us at amplifyingleadership.ca, a Twin Life coaching and business services division, to see all of our leadership services. Until next time, remember, leadership matters.